Well, welcome to the interagency briefing on construction management and claims disputes. So we appreciate you guys joining us. I am Dave Lowe. I'm a special advisor with Bakr Group. And here we have, as we mentioned, direct from Sarasota is Haitham Bakr. Say hey.
Hey, how are you?
Doing good. Well, welcome to everybody, and specifically that if we missed your agency and because of not being able to that you registered late, sorry about that. But there's a lot of folks here from all the way across all the different agencies. That's why we love doing these types of things, because it gives access and be able to roundtable with everybody from multiple agencies. So welcome. We appreciate you folks being here. And a quick disclaimer, this event is not affiliated or endorsed by any agency. It's provided to the audience for informational purposes only, and all participation in this briefing and any is voluntary, and any engagement of government personnel is not an indication of endorsement of or commitment to purchase from any vendor, including Bakr. Okay, so we can talk and keep things real. And a couple of things to keep things in rolling here in the webinar panel. You can open this thing on the right-hand side. If this is the first time you've ever been on a webinar, this is great things to know anyway. So you open that panel, and you can ask us questions, and just send it to us. You just type it in the bottom there and send it to us. The other way that you can let us know that you'd like to talk is to raise your hand. That's what that little diagram is. You can raise your hand, and we'll pay attention as best we can to be able to answer all those questions for you. And if you called in on the phone, make sure you enter your audio PIN. Don't enter 13. That's an old one for me. Yours might be 13, but enter your audio PIN in that if you would like to dialogue on the phone. And then finally, you can also email us, which is going to stay right there at the bottom of the screen at govsupport@bakrgroup.com. And that way we can dialogue throughout this and make sure that we hit your questions. So, and one more thing, if you don't like the way that Haitham and I are dressed, you can make us disappear completely and just look at that. But if you like the way we're dressed and you want to make us bigger, you can grab that little panel thing on the side. It could be above or below, and you can make us look bigger if you want to. So there you go. That's all those pieces. Now, Haitham, tell us what we'll be talking about today. We'll give you a little dose about Bakr, the FAR language. We'll talk about claims, construction claims, delay analysis, dispute resolution, CPM, some of the risks associated with that, and risk mitigation, and give you some ideas on how you can procure these services if you need those. So with that, I'm going to do a real quick poll before I get to Haitham. I expect a construction management requirement. Immediately you have something on your plate. I know there's a lot of folks that have already said that, so we appreciate that. And Q4 2016, which we are just about to get into, and getting into 2017. So let us know what it is that what you have, and that way we can keep things as close to on track for you guys as we possibly can. And we'll leave that open for another 10 or 15 seconds, but I appreciate you guys responding to that. 10 more seconds. Almost. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that's it. And just so you know that you're not alone, a lot of folks have things right away that they know that are on their plate going through next year as well. So we appreciate it. And with that, we're going to tell you a little bit about Bakr Group. Tell us about how you got this thing started. Why did you even decide to get into this, Haitham?
To start the company or to get into the construction management business?
Yes.
I'm not sure if you have my notes about my background. I have an architecture degree. I started architecture initially back in New York. So I did some architecture design, but during that I realized I like construction a lot, more than just the design. So I got my master's degree in civil engineering, focusing on construction management. With that, I've been actually in the field of construction for the last 29 years, and before that, 3 or 4 more years in architecture design. During that part of my work, working for private contractors, I also joined the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as a project manager initially, and worked for the government for a total of about 9 years. Project management or manager, I learned a lot in the Corps of Engineers of how to manage projects on behalf of the government, from the government point of view. And during that, in the construction and the design part of it, I learned also that there are many claims that comes in the government, and that really somehow appealed to me. So I joined the Savannah district and became one of the claims managers. And I did claims management as a claims manager for about 6 years with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. With that in mind, I learned a lot. So I decided that I'd like to start my own practice. And back in 1999, about 17 years ago, I resigned the government and started my own construction management firm, which focusing on claims consulting, CPM scheduling, dispute resolution, and obviously the overall construction management, which by virtue of the schedule that we have with the GSA, the 871-7 construction management is defined as an owner's representative in the private industry. Take the project from cradle to grave, overseeing it on behalf of the government.
Super. And as you mentioned, also GSA schedule holder. And across the board, right? We're not just talking about a sub-segment. Anything that deals with construction management, you've touched over the course of that of your career, right?
Correct.
Super. Well, good. Well, certainly appreciate that. Now we're here, and most contracting folks that deal in construction know this clause, but this is essentially why we're here, right? Because if they're going to create a claim, this is how it's done, right? So tell us about this.
Correct. Mostly a government agency will be receiving a claim. It doesn't work the other way around. The government doesn't, in most cases, start a claim against a contractor. They have the power to withhold payment. But usually a claim starts from the other direction. A contractor have a reason to believe that he's entitled to either time or material or monetarily. So they start a claim, and it is mandatory for them when they start a claim is to submit the claim under the FAR Claims Clause, as it shows there on the screen. This is the Disputes Act, Disputes Clause. This is where the government requires a contractor to submit the claim under this clause.
So tell us about construction claims and what are they, and we'll go through a couple of different pieces here. So what are construction claims?
Okay. It's very basic. A construction claim is basically a demand for payment of additional compensation or adjustment of the party's representative of the contract obligation, or any other change in the contract compensation of terms. In representing the dispute of the claim from the contractor, it is necessary to establish the liability of the owner. At this point would be the government. The contractor has to establish that there's liability and submit a claim. It's often referred to as entitlement. The contractor is after entitlement. They think they're entitled to something, and they have to just produce that and submit it to the owner, who's the government at this point, and they have to submit the damages that they are asking for and verify the damage, usually monetarily, and that is called the quantum, or referred to as the quantum. So basically that's what the claim is the request for compensation for money and sometimes time extension.
So tell us some of these, how do they occur, and what are some of the causes that would create?
Various causes, mostly delay claims due to an action by the government or by the owner or inaction. Some other claims are due to differing site conditions, unforeseen condition in the field, unforeseen condition in the project, or changes required by the design. The designer can, architect, engineer can go and do changes. And what really I'm trying to focus here is that those happens and the changes happens, the government need to recognize that. If they don't, and they do not issue the proper time extension or the proper acceptance of this change order, that will force the contractor to submit a claim for equitable adjustment.
All right. So who in the government side receives them and reviews them?
The contracting officer is the one who's addressed to receive those. Sometimes the contracting officer has their representatives, COR, and they have a technical staff in the construction area. If they have a construction area, that the staff is the one that receives it through the contractor officer.
And then tell us about the claims values and how that gets done.
As I mentioned before, value, obviously any contractor submits for a claim is looking for financial equitable adjustment, financial repayment, time. So the value of the claim has to be somehow determined that it's valid, and the contracting officer have different vehicles to determine the value. A value of a claim is portion and proportional to the construction contract amount to start with. So we need to verify, is that really realistic or not? Is the value of the claim that the contractor is asking for, and that involves labor, material, overhead, markups, all the items included in a project, that has to be verified, and that will make a construction claims value.
All right. So knowing that, what are some of the folks out that are here? Just a real quick question. What are some of the biggest issues that you see in your construction claims? Is it delays? Is it the cost? Verifying the validity of those, as Hytham just said, being able to verify those, and also agency exposure. These are some pretty major things that hit the radar sometimes, right, Hytham? We see this being splashed on the news now, right?
Very much so. Different agencies I have served and also worked for contractors that submitted claims, and because of other issues with, as they said, with the government, lack of response or lack of understanding of what the contract was supposed to be going through.
Right. So, and we got a bunch of folks there. Let's give you another 10 seconds, and then we'll get into some of the specifics of those, and of each one of these actually, of being able to help protect us against that. And with that, 2, 1, 0, boom, we're done. And I'll share those results. And so, again, we're not alone, right? This shows us that there's significant concern about delays, and what being able to cover, make sure that things are valid, right? Which does affect the cost, obviously, as that happens. So with that, we'll get back at it. But thank you very much for supplying us with that information. And let's talk about the delay side of this. So tell us about what happens and the impact on a project schedule and the types of things that you see as far as being able to help out with this, your delay analysis.
Correct. You can imagine that a project schedule is a fixed duration based on what either the requirements from the government or to finish by a certain duration or a certain date. So if you have a fixed date or a fixed duration of the schedule, you can imagine any delay or any change that will cause a delay will add number of days to that project schedule, and that will cause an immediate delay to the whole project duration and finish date. So if that in mind, there are some modifications to the contract, that change order submitted by the contractor or just change order submitted by the government as a request for change in the design, or change because of a need. The owner has a different need, the government have a different need to add a portion of work to the project. In that fashion, if you recognize that there is a change, it is very prudent that you allocate the proper time extension to that schedule, knowing that there would be changes.
So how is that determined? Who determines that, and is it both parties? How does that work?
Usually it is issued by the government, if the government is the one that establishing the change, and obviously the government needs to have an experienced professional that can determine how much time is reasonable to allocate to this one. And many times the designer, the architect, or the engineer that working for the government can let the government know how much time reasonably is expected to be added, but also they can ask the contractor, and the contractor can come back to them with the expected time extension that he or she is requesting for that type of additional change order, and it is on the government's responsibility to either accept or reject this amount, and it can be negotiated sometimes in between. Whatever
Right.
number of days the contractor said that change will take, the government, through an experienced CM, whether it's through the government own employee or an outsourced CM, can let them know that this is reasonable or unreasonable, and we can negotiate something in between. But you need to recognize that time extension is needed to be added with every change order if that change order have some meaningful magnitude of time and amount of work to be done. If not, then you are asking for a claim. Contractor will do the work and will have to request or have to proceed with the work under dispute. That's the term that will be used.
Sure. So some of the methods used for being able to determine these delays and the results of those, software and things like that, give us an idea of what that means.
Correct. In determining a project schedule, a contractor, as part of the specification for the project, most government project and government specs require a schedule of the project. And that project, most contractors use different software programs available in the market, and many of them started with a different timeline and Microsoft project. And the most common one, not that I'm trying to sell that one because I have no involvement with it, but what's used commonly is Primavera project scheduling. And Primavera is a software commonly or widely used in the construction just because it offers a lot of ability and capabilities of details. So within that software of developing the schedule, there is also a method that you can analyze the delay, and you can compare the schedules and updates of the schedules. You see what transpired the month prior versus the current month, and that software is able to do this for you.
And also come up with the costs and the fees associated with those delays so that it's fair, right? The objective is to make sure that it's fair.
Yes, and that gets us to a different slide later on about the details of the schedule, and if that schedule details is included, then we'll be able to determine costs and fees associated.
Exactly, exactly. So when you start talking about resolving these disputes, because this happens regularly, right? This is nothing new. Construction projects never work out exactly the way that they were anticipated, right? So there's always something that happens in the middle of those projects, and anybody that's done any construction knows this, right? So the CEO receives the claim. What happens then?
As you can see from the response to the previous question, many of the participants have already claimed, so they are aware of that and they know what it is. Obviously it wasn't avoided, so they have claims. And once the contracting officers receive a claim, now he or she has the obligation to start reviewing that, and I believe within 45 days have to have a response, or 60 days, and then 90 days. There are some determination that has to be come from the contracting officer. So there is a response required, whether to reject the claim or to approve the claim or request additional documentation. It has to be reviewed by the contracting officer, his representative, the technical staff if they have any, or an outsource someone to review the claim for validity, for reasonableness, for cost. A lot of the details within the claim, if it's not sufficient, a contracting officer can ask for more details and then issue a recommendation or determine whether it's valid or not, make a decision. And send the decision, if it's the decision to deny the claim based on analysis, submit it to the contracting officer, then obviously the contractor has different channels to proceed with that one, including appeals. And the appeals process goes obviously beyond the contracting officer, right, and it goes all the way up to the courts system.
And then also once this happens, the agency also can be subject to an audit, right? So
no, the audit part of it is actually before the contracting officer decision.
Okay.
Part of the review on behalf of the contracting officer is sometimes they request an independent audit to review the contractor's books. And again, contractors are, I'm also a licensed general contractor, but we're not angels. and sometimes they submit claims that somehow either mistakenly added document numbers here or there. So those numbers has to be verified, especially the project amount of money or a project contractual amount is fixed, but you don't really know the contractor's overheads and markup and field or condition and staff and so forth. So that part of the quantum of the claim, the monetary part of the claim, has to be verified. If it can be verified internally by the contractor on staff, by the contracting officer on staff or on outsourced construction consultants, they can actually ask for an independent audit from, for example, with the Defense Department, there's the DCAA, Defense Contract Audit Agency, and I believe other government agencies will have also a independent audit agencies. Those guys are very specific and very educated and somewhat very meticulous. They can go and audit the contractor's own quick own books to verify what the contractor is really asking for, specifically to the overhead. A lot of stuff can be hidden in the overhead, and that has to be verified. That's when the contracting officer asks for independent audit, and based on the audit, it helps the contracting officer make a decision, is that yes, there's validity to the specific percentage of overhead that's asked for. I'm just going to say this quickly. Some contractors are big enough that they have 4 or 5 different offices in a category of office, the domestic office, the regional office, the headquarters office, and so forth. All these have different overheads that has to be added up, and they are allocated to a project. So that has to be verified, that percentage.
Got it. Very good. Love it. So tell us about CPM and NAS and any other acronym that could look like CPM and NAS, depending on the agency, because it really depends. Most of the agencies know what this is, but go ahead and give us an overview of what the critical path method is.
As we mentioned earlier, every construction project requires a schedule. And again, I shouldn't say just construction. Most of the project, even IT project, requires a schedule of activities and duration of so forth. One of the methods used currently and the latest method, if that schedule, is what we call critical path method. There used to be a method before called arrow diagram, and the arrow diagram, if anybody familiar with it, you take the arrow and you take the arrow from a start point to a finish point, and then you start, finish, and so forth. But with the construction industry's complicated project, there had to be another way, because sometimes you can overlap activities. And so it's not going to be always start to finish. There is also overlapping. So they came up with that method, and it's method called critical path method, CPM. And some agencies know it, or also known as in some other agencies, including the Army and the military, for that matter, Army, Navy, and Air Force, as network analysis system. It's just similar. It's the same exact thing. It's a schedule, and a schedule using a software. And now how complicated it is that what you develop for. But the term is basically a schedule, whether it's a CPM or an NAS, is the project schedule.
And who winds up submitting this schedule?
That's a good question. Actually, the contractor is the one to submit the schedule based on certain requirement within the specifications of the project. The government sets the specification, or the government consultant sets the specification of how the CPM or the project schedule is supposed to look like, but the contractor is obligated to submit that schedule. It is the contractor's schedule. Remember that his or her schedule that is to be submitted by the contractor.
So, and reviewed by the CO and the core, right? The technical rep, right?
It is. It is reviewed by the contracting officer, his or her representative, or the technical staff that they have, or supposedly the construction management firm if they have one, and they review the comment if they cross-reference that schedule with the specs that are put out there, and see if the schedule meets the specs, meets the duration, meets the finish date, meets the milestones, that if there are any milestones set by the government for this project, and so, then obviously approves it.
And this is important because this also goes to keeping you out of hot water, right? So there's a difference between comments and recommendations, right?
Very much so. I've seen some in the past, some government staff feel that they know enough about the schedule, so they like to intersect their own input. And be careful and be aware of that one. If you try to force your own opinion or request changes or request duration to be changes, or be careful, that is not your schedule. It's the contractor. So if you enforce any of those demands, a contractor can definitely adhere to those commands, but will definitely turn around and hit you with a claim. And will say that I was told to do that. So if, for example, if a duration of an activity on a project have 10 days and you go and tell the contractor, no, this can be done in 5 days, 7 days, he might say, yes, I'll do it, but in the meantime, it doesn't get done this way, so he can go back and claim and say that you told me so.
And we want to avoid those things, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. So talk about some of the detail that can be in there. Is it high level? Is it detailed? What is it?
Correct. Now, this is the part I was talking about in the previous slide about how detailed do you want the schedule to show, and how many activities, how many sub-activities. Do you want to go down to the minute hammering a nail, or you just want to see how long the duration will take of completing a task? But the detail I was talking about is how do you want the schedule to look in relation to activities, cost, and resource. Some government agents want to see the cost and the manpower of every activity. So we say that's cost and resource loaded schedule. It can also only be cost loaded, or it can be only resource loaded. It can be both. That's when you ask the contractor to show every activity, give them value to each activity, monetary value to each activity. So if you end up having a 500 to 600 or 1,000 or 2,000 activities, each activity will have a dollar value. That total dollar values of each activity will add to the total project's cost or budget or contract amount. And you want to know also the manpower. So if your field project manager wants to check on the contractor's allocated manpower and specific activity, you can go and check on that. And that's really a way for you to know that whether the contractor is able to produce on time or not. You can foresee. If the contractor tell you for a certain activity, I have one crew, and that crew is about 4 people, you go down the next day and you see only 3 people, you know that he's not going to produce in the duration that he said for this activity because he's short. And that gives you a flag to let the contractor know you might be delayed. Do something about it ahead of time. This is a way to avoid that. Same thing, we can have equipment on each activity. What kind of equipment you're going to have? And so you will have 3 columns next to each activity, one for cost, one for resources, and one for equipment. And that all this one here, it gets into details that you need to have a professional CPM scheduler or construction manager that knows this one here and can foresee problems. That's really the whole idea, is to foresee problems and avoid it by having these details.
Love it. So let's talk about some of the risks here. Some of these are some of them common sense, right? So uncertainties, you just mentioned labor, availability, productivity, unknown condition. My favorite is Murphy's Law, because you just don't know, but you know Murphy's going to pop up somewhere when it comes to construction, right?
Correct.
So you have uncertainties. Tell us a little bit about some of the ambiguities and those, the cost estimates and the schedules, some of those things. Tell us about those.
Correct. As we know, there are always ambiguities for both the government and the contractor, for the designer for that matter. There is unforeseen site condition. There is condition in the field, specifically if you're doing the project from inception. Underground, you have no idea what's underground, even though some geotechnical analysis are done and some data samples were taken to us, but still you can run across some unforeseen condition, and that has to be presented and has to be addressed, and the government need to acknowledge that and allow the contractor the decent, a reasonable amount of time and money to go through. That's one of the major ones, if any. Other ambiguity is the determination of how to address what's in the specs. If there is two different understandings, and some contractors understand it in a different way. The government issue a different language that sometimes is ambiguous, and ambiguity goes against the drafter. This is one of the big claims we've had, and we always go back to the government. When I was with the government, we usually receive that, and if we see it ambiguous, and obviously ambiguity on behalf of the drafter, being either the architect, the engineer, or the project manager that developed the specs, if it is not clear enough for the contractor or any specific third-party person to understand it, then we usually go ahead and tell the contractor, yes, we acknowledge that there was ambiguity. We are the drafter. It goes against the drafter. So partly language, partly cost, if it wasn't allocated properly. But what we see mostly is the unforeseen site conditions.
Absolutely. And then so the other piece is just the risk event probability, which is the potential of something happening and the impact of that. Some things, like you said, unforeseen. Some things that you can tell. You know the winter's coming. You know, so you have what are the risks of if you have snow potential and things like that. So these are the types of things that need to be included, right? So anything else about risk event probability that you want to add in there?
Well, yeah. When you say potential and impact, the major part of this one here is avoidance of a claim. So if you, as a contracting officer, recognize that there is a change and there is a modification, try to be vigilant and issue the proper modification time and cost. And that is one of the ways to avoid the risk of having a claim. And that is one of the impacts that you can avoid. If you, sometimes we have some hot heads, I'm going to put it this way, in the field, and we butt heads many times with project managers and construction managers. They think they know everything, and they don't want to give the contractor the proper time extension. And if you do this one, it will come back and haunt us as a government and end up having to pay and have a claim. So if we can recognize that, have the due diligence enough, and be proper in issuing the cost proper and the time extension proper associated with that particular modification or change order, that will avoid a claim.
Hotheads in construction? I can't imagine such a thing.
No such a thing.
So with that, I'm going to ask another real quick question of what you need help with, because we will make sure that we follow up with you. We're going to open this up for questions in just a minute, but let us know what you need help with, and we will absolutely get you some additional information specific to what it is that you need. If you have a specific claim question, we'll make sure we reach out and help answer that. And you can answer, if you need help with more than one, this is a multiple choice, so you can pick as many as you like, and we can include you in that. So we'll let that be open for just a minute. And any additional questions, as I mentioned before, you can open that panel up and you can type in a question, you can raise your hand, you can shoot us an email, and we will absolutely do our best to be able to answer it. So we can roundtable, as a matter of fact. We can unmute you and ask if you have some specific questions. So with that, I'm going to give you 10 more seconds, and you can fill that out. We have really good participation. We really appreciate you guys sharing information with us so that we can help you out. 4, 3, 2, 1, and boom. There you go. So, and with that, just know that we'll be reaching out if you have some of those, if you need some more understanding with those. So we will be reaching out to you folks with that. All right. And specific questions. If you have a specific question that you want to include, pop open that panel, raise your hand, or just you can hit that little hand thing, and it'll raise. You can shoot us an email, and we'll do that. So real quick, I'm going to open up the panel over here, and I'll ask a couple things. I got a couple things in front of me another way too. So, is it best for government to execute a design build or a design build or design build package? That's a great question.
It is an excellent question, and the answer is all of the above. It depends on the situation, and it depends on the requirement of the government.
So Danny, maybe we'll get some more information and we'll get back to you. And Sarah says, how do I avoid getting a claim? Well, that's exactly why we're here, right? The objective is to try to minimize those. So how do we avoid getting a claim to begin with?
It's a great question also, and I briefly answer that, but the avoidance is to recognize, first of all, do your due diligence. When you issue a construction contract, make sure that that contract has no ambiguity in the language, no ambiguity in the cost, no ambiguity in the time frame that you put. Be realistic, understand the duration that you are asking the contractor to do the work for. Sometimes the government have restriction that they have to have the project done by a certain date for whatever reason that is. So we want to make sure that project, you backtrack now. You need to start early enough. If you have certain date that in 2017 we're going to have an election, we're going to have the president moving into the White House, so we need to really start a year earlier to start modifying whatever has to be modified in the South Lawn or whatever. So this is what you need to do. If you have a specific date that you have to be finished by, or if you have a project duration, you tell the contractor this needs to be done in 600 days. Make sure that the 600 days are accurate, are probable, that it can be done. Check with the staff. If you have the staff, check with the CM. If you have an outside CM, make sure the duration that you're asking is realistic. Same thing with the contract language. Whatever contract method or vehicle you use, make sure. So cross the T's and dot the I's, as we say in the business, and make sure as much as possible. Obviously, there's nothing is 100%, but make sure as much as possible before you put the package out that is somewhat realistic. That is the first part to avoid a claim. Now, as David said earlier, there is no construction contract or project without a claim, just because it's either unforeseen stock condition or an honest request for a change. So there is that here. However, if that is not the condition, to avoid unrequested claims is to be vigilant and be proper. If you receive a modification request or a change order, if you think it's valid, then issue the proper cost for it and issue the proper time extension for it. That way you can avoid the claim and get it off your desk and make sure that it is. Try to be fair. When I was with the government, we always thought to be a win-win negotiator.
So real quick, we got to move through a couple more of these. Jeff, if you're there, I'm going to unmute you because you have a great question. And Jeff, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Jeff. So first of all, what agency are you with, real quick?
Department of Veterans Affairs down here in San Diego.
Awesome. Great place down in San Diego. So is kind of contractor claim, you go ahead and ask the question to Hytham.
We had about a year from award to start, right? And they want to claim ICLEI formula, but they've also been awarded about $21 million in other contracts and modifications, and I was just wondering if they can claim ICLEI, with that amount of new business.
Very good question. Let me just let everybody know what is the ICLEI formula is. ICLEI formula is acknowledged and recognized by the court as a formula to determine the contractor's overhead. As I mentioned, there are different tiers of overheads. So in order to determine the portion of the overhead related to the project is used by the ICLEI formula. So the ICLEI formula allows the contractor to ask for overhead for that project that he did not actually gain. So based on what you tell me, he had a year, and if he was able to cover that overhead from other method and other means, then yeah, he's not entitled to it. But some contractors just get that benefit and don't do anything, knowing that they will get their overhead compensated for. So if they didn't have any work to cover that portion of the overhead, yes, he can get it. But from what I hear you saying, he had received other change orders and other work to cover that overhead. You just have to approve that. Excuse me.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Jeff?
Yeah, I also have a legal opinion in on that, but that's pretty much what I concluded, because they have to determine that they were not able to get other work, and of course they're at bonding capacity and other things, small business limits and that sort of thing, where they could also, but there's still some well, they could have, they won other business, and you know, the reason they got denied other work was maybe not because of lack of trying.
Yeah. I
Can I
I
answer
hear you.
other?
Awesome. Well, that's great question, Jeff. Thanks for asking that, and we certainly appreciate you doing that. So here's another one. Have you had any experience with sloppy scheduling reaching into the realm of false claims? That came from Gina.
Oh yes, very much so. That's why it depends on who does the schedule, and many government specifications require the resume of the scheduling consultants. They require him or her to have certain experience, and some even go further, requiring that scheduling consultant for the contractor to be independent of the contractor. So you need to verify that scheduling consultant credential, experience, ability to perform and produce a schedule. And if that is not the case, yes, you will get a sloppy schedule and you will get the problems you asked for.
Great. So Danny had a clarification. What type of project is design build best suited for versus design bid build? And I'm going to follow that up with his other comment, which is we see a lot of risk with design bid build. So you may be answering your own question there, Danny, but definitely, like Hytham said, it really depends on the project itself and looking at that risk and exposure, right? Right, Hytham?
That is correct. The design build, keep in mind, design build is one entity. You go to a construction management firm or a general contractor and tell them, you take care of this one from cradle to grave, so the general contractor takes care of it, gets the designer, or whoever, engineers, different disciplines, architect, and they will be part of the package whereby the contractor is responsible for that and gets the design done. Design bid build is the traditional one. You have independent design firms, architect, engineers. Then you put this out to bid. The government have the specification, puts it out to bid, gets whatever number of contractors bidding on it. You open the bid, and then you go ahead and hire the contractors to build it. So you have three different processes, two different entities, versus design build is one entity.
Love it. So we have a few more questions, but we're going to get those offline. There's a couple of details in there. Really, really great questions. If you have additional questions, we will continue to take those, and we'll include those as part of the follow-up. But just keep this on time, and I'm already a couple minutes over, so I hate that. But number one, be realistic. Keeping you out of hot water. This is one of my favorite pieces here because I love to be able to help contracting across the board. So, Hytham, you've said it multiple times, and that is be realistic in what you're asking, double checking the performance deliverables, and being realistic within those duration timelines, right? This is where we get ourselves in most trouble, correct?
Yes.
Yep. So, and then the other piece is avoid making recommendations, make only comments associated with that. And Hytham recommended this too. Look for qualified, experienced CM firms. There's a bunch of folks there on 871-7 that you can find. And beyond that, though, is to verify the contractor personnel credentials, as Hytham mentioned about including resumes in that, especially on the beyond and including those certifications so that you're getting what you want. And this is something that we're in talking with contracting folks is expanding who you work with, infusing new blood, because if you want, it's insanity, right? If you keep doing the same thing over and over, you're going to get the same results. A lot of times what we're dealing with is the fact that it's always been done that way, and we always use these people, and next thing you know, you have the same problems that you have over and over again. The other piece that we'd like to talk about especially is establishing and using BPAs. Faster access to the right folks, access to industry experts, and minimizing the paperwork. If you're not familiar with BPAs, you can ask. I can help govern that one a little bit. So with that, procurement options, at least for us, okay, we mentioned the schedule, professional services schedule, obviously, but here's our information, here's our DUNS, here's our contract number. If you need it, if you're with a VA and we need to run through service disabled partners, we can do that. 8A partners, WSB, whatever you need, other vehicles, we will build the bridge if you want access to the expertise that we have here. And there's plenty of folks out there as well. So with that, the follow-up that we're going to do, we'll send you the presentation. That was another question that was out there. Yes, we will send you a copy of the presentation, as well as a Q&A, including all these, as well as the ones that we're going to be receiving, the ones that we've answered already. Supporting documentation, Hytham, you have some information specific to claims that'll be included, as well as our capabilities from Bakr Group and the procurement options there, and additional documentation as we collect it will be forwarded to you guys. And with that, we want to say thanks for joining us. Here's our information. You can reach out to Hytham directly if it's a burning issue. Pick up the phone, call his cell, preferably after we get off of here, or you can shoot him an email and make sure that you have. If it's general questions, contracting questions, feel free to send those over to govsupport@bakrgroup.com, or you can reach out to me with that as well. And we will promise we'll get back with the rest of the questions. I see some more questions coming in. Any parting comments that you'd like to share with everybody, Hytham, before we jump?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for participating, and the question that came very well. I'd like those questions, and I wish to be able to answer more, so please feel free. I'll be very happy to answer any question you have and give you whatever knowledge I have about this subject.
Super, will do, and we will follow up. Everybody that responded, we'll make sure we reach out to you personally and get your input and whatever it is that you need. We'll do our best to be able to fulfill that for you, and we will see you next time. We're going to do another one of these. This was well attended, so we're going to do another one in a couple months before we get too crazy into the September world. And in the meantime, enjoy your July 4th. Happy Independence Day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks much.